why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do for Cisco?
Great. Thanks for inviting me, Chris. So I lead our hybrid workplace experience, go-to-market, and strategy for our collaboration devices within Cisco.
And what does exactly that entail? What are you
That's a
what are
good
you
question
doing?
because hybrid work often means different things to different people.
Yeah.
But so think of it a little bit as we're the glue between our resale partners, for example, our marketing organization, our engineering organization, our product management organization, and then we help develop the strategy. We do a lot of work with customers as well, and what the go-to-market should be for our devices.
And with that hybrid work, how do you see hybrid work evolving?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because, if you take the premise that hybrid work is about, okay, I might be working at home, I might be working in the office, I might be working in between, and how do you manage that, how do you manage that journey back and forth? And I think, predominantly what you see is most companies don't know, coming out of the pandemic, don't know how to attract the employees back to the office. So what you've seen most companies do is put in mandates to say you got to be in the office 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, whatever it is. At Cisco, we're actually #1 best workplace to be at multiple times now in a row. We have no mandates. So what our CEO Chuck has said is the office needs to be a magnet. So we know how to manage that journey, and I know we'll get into that in a little bit more depth as well. But there's a lot of companies that struggle with that. They
Mhm.
struggle with how do I get people in, so I'll throw in a mandate. All well and good, but you've seen that in the last few years. So about a year ago, 2 years ago, you saw the pendulum go a little bit more towards the employee. So they felt more empowered. And what did we get? The largest mass resignations that we've ever had in history. So the balance of power at this moment in time is sitting a little bit more with the employer because of the economy and everything else that's going on around that. But the risk is if the employers don't sort of figure this out, it's going to swing back to the employee at some stage, whether that's 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, or whatever, and then you could be in trouble again because then people are going to say, actually, you know what? I don't like these mandates. I want to actually go and work for an organization that doesn't have the mandates. And then,
Absolutely.
so then you're going to get more and more companies trying to figure out, like, how do we attract people into the office and do hybrid work successfully as opposed to putting down mandates?
Cisco really lives that,
Yes.
right?
Yep, we
And
do.
across the world, you have office spaces that you're also building out with really your latest thought leadership in that space, and you're living and testing it. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So funny enough, we started this even before the pandemic. The pandemic actually accelerated that. So we've been building out these regional collaboration centers. And basically, what the way that it started off with is saying is like, okay, we need to figure out what the technology is, and then build the environment around the technology to then make sure that you deliver an experience that is attractive to people wanting to actually go into the office. So we have these centers. We're continuously doing this, so there's not something that was done for a period of time and then that stops. And it's been incredibly successful in there in terms of how we've then been able to drive a success in hybrid work as well. So in Cisco, you have a complete choice between you and your manager as to how you want to work, whether you're 100% at home or 100% in the office or anything else in between there. And part of that is not only what the office itself looks like, but obviously we make the world's best collaboration devices from a video perspective in there in particular. So we know how to drive engagement, whether you're at home, whether you're mobile, or whether you're in the office. And I think what's interesting is if you look at it sort of before the pandemic, people only cared about what was happening in the office. So if you were to be unlucky enough to be remote and over video, the focus was always in the office because typically all the important people were in the office. And if you were remote, well, who cares? And then what's happened is during the pandemic, that's now come full circle and changed around a little bit, where it's like, well, it could be the CEO now that's at home and everybody else is in the office.
Sure.
So now you got to make sure is that you drive an experience when you go to the office that is make sure that everybody feels included, both the people at home, but also the people now in the conference room. Think about it in the old days. If I'm sitting at home on my system, and I'm looking at a conference room, and I have no intelligence or anything else in that conference room. Could be 10 people sitting in the conference room. Well, they're tiny little pixels on what I'm actually looking at. So, but now it's like, how do I make sure that those people in the conference room feel included also to the people remotely? So those whole dynamics have really changed over the last couple of years because of the way that people are now trying to work. And some companies have figured it out, many haven't, hence the mandates.
Sure. And Cisco is constantly coming out with new products that are meeting these demands,
Yes.
right? And I believe one of the newest ones is EQX, which is a
Yep.
really exciting product.
Yeah.
You can tell us a little bit about that product?
Sure. I think Cisco is in a unique position in terms of if you want to do hybrid work well, you have to have the right ergonomic device that allows you to have the best experience so that can be engaged, and that it looks after your well-being as well, no matter where you want to work from. So we've basically moved on to next generation collaboration devices over the last year, 2 years, and the EQX is one of the later ones. So it's in essence, it's meant for medium to probably medium large type of rooms, conference rooms, but it's in essence an all-in-one. So what happens is that you have a chassis that has speakers, microphones, everything else built into it. Customer can supply their own displays, 65, 75-inch displays, dual displays on there, and then they know and are guaranteed what the experience will actually be. And then, that on its own, when you put that then together with some of the Salamander credenzas or smart wall lifts or any of those things, then again, it sort of completes that room from an experience perspective.
And you're looking at the EQX. There's a serious sound system in there.
Yeah. If you ever take the back, it's funny because if you ever actually take the back off of it, there's like this. I mean, Cisco's always been renowned for the audio quality, not only on the input in terms of microphones and arrays, but also in terms of what the sound quality is coming out. So the idea is that it's as natural as possible. So you're right. There's this massive. There's 8 speakers on the top, and there's basically a subwoofer built into the chassis itself that then gives an unbelievable experience. And the idea is, and the example that I always give is, if you're just on an audio conference call, most of the time on the telephone, you're only going to get 3.5 kilohertz is all that you're hearing. Well, a normal human being can hear up to 20 kilohertz typically. So what happens is that your brain then has to compensate for what it's missing. And that's why it's so fatiguing if you're an audio call. Not only do you not see, but what you're hearing is a fraction of, for example, what we're hearing now, where we're hearing the full spectrum audio. So the audio piece is incredibly important. And the more natural that you make it, that in essence, what we try to do, the latest sort of tagline that we have is distance zero. So how do we create distance zero? And part of that is to make it as natural as possible so that the experience becomes as engaging, that your brain is not trying to compensate. Because anything that happens to, I mean, you've been on plenty of calls, or you've seen, you watch the news or whatever, and then there's a breakup in the video connection to whoever they're interviewing. Well, your brain immediately picks that up and then has to figure out to compensate that. So the moment something goes wrong, you notice it, and that's what then that you notice. You've suddenly lost focus on exactly what the conversation was about or what you're trying to achieve.
So the EQX is an all-in-one package.
Yes.
Right. But you can add external microphones as well, right?
You can, yes. So this leads a little bit on to why would you want to do some of those things. So like I said, you can use it from a medium room, maybe a 8-person room, to sort of a larger room as well. Once you start to do that, then yes, ideally, and there's going to be multiple reasons why you'd want to have, and the microphones that we have, for example, the new Cisco Microphone Pro has AI and compute built into the microphone itself. And part of that then is we announced a bunch of AI innovations that have now come out as part of our cinematic meetings. So now, for example, think of a traditional table where you might have, I don't know, let's say 14 people, 7 on each side. If you've got your video system at one end of that table, then there's laws of physics. If I have a camera on that video system, if people are talking across to each other, I really can't see what's going on because I'm looking at the side of their heads then, and I can't see what's going on. So now what you can do is we have something called cross view, where you can put two cameras on either side of the room. And what happens is the AI engine that we have inside of our devices will then understand who's having the conversation. And if you're remote, they'll project that to you. So imagine that cross view. If people are talking across the table, each camera on each side will then pick up whoever's speaking, so that if I'm sitting on the far end, those people look as if they're, I can see their facial expressions. I know they're talking to each other and not talking to me, but I can actually see that conversation instead of the side of their head that you typically can get.
Yeah.
Now the microphones are basically then the ears of the system. The cameras then become the eyes of the system. So basically you have multiple cameras in there, and then our video system becomes the brains. And one of the things, we're the only one in the industry that since 2015 have used NVIDIA chips inside of our devices. So we have a lot of data and information to make the AI as successful as possible so that you don't really notice it. And I think one of the challenges that we have within our industry is everybody can go to a data sheet and go, yeah, check, 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 check. What that doesn't identify is the experience that you actually get. And does that experience drive the outcome that you're looking for? Are your people engaged? Do they feel included? Do they feel that they're part of the meeting, no matter whether they're at home or whether they're actually physically sitting in that office space? So all these things can then get connected, in this case, into the EQX. And we have systems that go to bigger rooms, as well as systems that then go to smaller rooms, and then systems that can be at home as well, with the goal to drive that experience to make sure that people are engaged.
You're absolutely right. Especially, when you're talking about the facial expressions, I mean, so much of communication is based upon the nonverbal.
Right.
And you can really lose that quickly, over your WebEx call or a Teams call, when you don't see their expressions, right? Are they bought in?
Right.
Even sometimes you can tell that someone has a question.
Yep.
Right. But if they don't have the camera on because they don't look good on camera anyways, because of the angle or whatever,
Yep,
then that really impedes the meeting.
it does. And also, I mean, going back to, there's a couple of points in that. The first is plenty of people that turn their video off. So part of this is you got to have a culture within the organization that understands that when you have video turned off, you're not part of the meeting. And what happens is, if there were three of us here, and we're all three, or you and I are on video, and the third person switches their video off, then what happens is our brains will automatically tune them out as if they're not there.
Yeah.
So again, if you're an organization that says, well, I want to make sure that everybody feels that they're included, you have to stomp out this, well, you guys know what I look like. Chris, you know what I look like. Why do I need to turn my video on? Because you know what I look like.
Yeah.
That misses the whole point. And there's plenty of organizations where they fully allow themselves to have video turned off. So what happens, for example, with our devices is you can measure and you can see whether video is turned on or not. Now, our devices work inside of Microsoft Teams. That works obviously with Zoom, with Google. But if you then have it connected inside of WebEx, I have inside of my WebEx something known as personal insights. And only I see that, my manager, the company, nobody sees that except me. And what that does, it tells me what my behavior is. So if I'm one of those people that switches video off, I will be shown that, like, hey, look, this is the percentage of time that you actually turned video off. This is the number of times that you booked a meeting outside of the time zone of the people that you booked the meetings with. This is the number of times that you turned up late. This is how often you've not participated because you weren't sharing or anything like that. So that information is what we're trying to use. Again, back to the magnet instead of a mandate, is then help the individual drive their behavior in there as well. So they go, oh yeah, maybe I should turn it on more often because then I know it'll be more engaging.
Have you seen any organizations have mandates to have the video on, or not?
Yeah, it's typically then it's I would say it's more of a culture than anything else.
Hmm.
So if that culture is driven from the top, then then it'll work. The challenge that you sometimes have is the culture is not driven from the top. So then people say, well, look, if the executives aren't doing this, then why should I bother doing this?
Hmm.
And I think as a company, you got to look at it and say, what different companies have a different outlook as to how much they find the employee aspect of it and how important they are. So lots of companies will go on to best workplace, you name it, and they'll take that as a serious thing. So from an HR perspective, they're like, okay, we need to get up the charts because a lot of companies understand that how your employees feel is directly related to whether you can retain your talent easily or whether you can attract your talent easily. So there's lots of factors around that, and one of those is, do you feel as if you're part of the organization? If you're always the one with the video off, or your boss is always turning their video off, you, human nature, you're going to get disconnected.
Hmm.
You're going to get disconnected.
Absolutely. Now, you have these offices worldwide,
Yeah,
and there are also experience centers as well that you bring clients into, and
yeah,
we're really proud to be part of that overall experience.
yeah,
The closest one to here is Penn One, and I know that you just installed an EQX system
yep.
there, but obviously there was already technology in that
There
space.
was.
You tell us how you like switched over that room?
Yeah, yeah. You know what? And I think one of the interesting thing is at certainly our US experience centers, we have a lot of the Salamander credenzas, furnitures, lifts, a lot of that then makes our systems automatically ADA disability compliant as well. But what was the nice thing about the EQX, and one of the reasons why we sort of standardized on Salamander in there is exactly for that reason, is we know we're always going to be coming out with new systems,
Mm-hmm.
and in this case the retrofit could use the existing furniture that was already there. So the nothing is bolted onto the wall. This facility, Pen One, is actually in New York City, in Manhattan. So from a labor perspective, if you've got to drill anything into the wall or whatever, that's a huge amount of expense just there. So with the Salamander and the Cisco devices, it looks as if it's mounted to the wall, but it actually isn't. And again, the other thing that we've learned is, all of our devices have not only environmentals, but also things like people count and what have you built into our devices. So we can then get an overview of what's being used well, what's not being used well, what works, what doesn't work. And then we use that to then help design and develop the next experience centers and the next offices that we're going to deploy. And what that invariably means is that you're going to have a shift into a layout potentially in an office. So I don't think these layouts will go for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Absolutely no way. You'll probably find within a couple of years it's like, okay, this worked well, we need to redesign this or rebuild this, move this wall over there. So everything then becomes modular. So it's very important that the way that you have our systems, and in this case with Salamander Furniture, that you can easily make those changes without having to do major reconstruction.
Sure. Yeah. We see all these, sensors everywhere, and all this data is coming back to the stakeholders, to the AV team, to the facilities team.
Yep.
But if they get that data, and then the construction costs to make the change that the data is telling you that you need to make in order to have the best ROI in the space is too high, why even have the data?
Yes.
Right? So you're really developing these rooms with the construction methods and with the furniture from Salamander that allows those changes to be made
Right.
efficiently, allows you to use that data and then have better ROI
Yes.
as technology changes and as the room's use case change as well.
Yeah. And I think so. I think there's a couple of points inside of that. One is that you talk a lot about the data, and a lot of companies will say it's like, okay, well, the data's telling me stuff that I already know, which is, the office is barely being used. And, sometimes if the office is being used 50% of the time, they think that's a win in there as well. Certain companies will have mandates. You must come in Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, which means there's 4 days out of the week where the office is completely empty
Mm-hmm.
in there as well. So, the challenge is how do you get employees to want to go to the office so that then becomes natural and that you can balance all of that out? Because one of the things that people often don't take into account is if you have an office, let's say the office, the closest Cisco office to me is about 15 minutes away. It can hold 300 people. Well, during the pandemic, when we were allowed to go in there, that office was still being fully heated in the winter, and you know how cold the winters are up here, and then fully cooled in the summer as well. And the 300 people that live around the office were fully heating and cooling their homes at the same time. So this notion, the other way you got to look at this is from a sustainability perspective, is how do I drive employees to want to go to the office? So I'm 15 minutes away. Believe it or not, especially in the middle of winter, I'm the only one at home. It is far more sustainable for me to go and drive to the office and consume the half a gallon of fuel that I need to go and drive to the office and back than it is to stay at home and have the heating on normal. So I would go out of the home and then turn my heating way down. That's going to be far more sustainable. Now multiply that by the 300 other people in the same. Now, not everybody is going to be in a situation where they're the only ones at home, granted.
Sure.
But what percentage do you want to take? Take 50%, take 60%. So I think that could then be another reason, not only because of, hey, you have a great collaboration center, experience center, like you said as well, where people want to go to the office, but I might want to go to the office because it's actually a more sustainable option for me as well. Particular in sort of cities where you then have a lot of infrastructure, trains, and everything else to take you to the office. So that could be the second reason. The third reason, what people don't realize, is that most of the time their homes are very unhealthy if they're in a small bedroom, small office, doors closed. You'll be shocked how quickly your carbon dioxide levels actually go up. In my home office, if I don't have any heat on in terms of airflow, within an hour I will double my CO, because I'm measuring it, I will double my CO2 level to 1100 parts per million. Well, most of the time, once you get north of 1,000, then certain groups of people will start to get affected by that. Once you get above 1,500, it's generally considered to be extremely unhealthy. The problem is you don't know that that's what's causing it. You have no way of knowing that. Your symptoms will be is you're going to get more fatigued, you're going to get more irritable, you won't be able to concentrate as much, and your productivity will go down. And I think it's Google that did a survey not so long ago where they actually measured this. They had developers, and they put these developers in different rooms and had the carbon dioxide at different levels in each room. And they were able to exactly see that their productivity, the amount of code that those developers could produce when they were exposed to high levels of carbon dioxide, was far less than those that were in fresh air. So a lot of companies will start to think about that. And people don't realize that the home can actually be extremely unhealthy, especially if you have radiant heat and you have no air circulation. Because what happens is houses these days, they're all tight.
Yeah.
They're all designed to be extremely tight. So you're getting no fresh air that's coming into houses, and especially if you have radiant heat. And a lot of places around the world have just radiant heat. And in the winter, people aren't going to think of opening up the window or anything like that. So that's going to be the third leg of the stool there, which is I'm going to go to the office because it's better for my well-being. And a good little example of that was earlier this year. As you know, in this area, we had a lot of smoke being sent over from Canada, to the extent that it was the worst pollution ever in New York City, to the extent that now you didn't even have to measure it because people could visibly see it in there. But our office there, everything is measured. All of our devices have environmental sensors in there in the open area. So people were actually coming to the office because they couldn't maintain in their apartments clean air. And they realized, okay, in the office, it's actually clean air. So let me do my 10, 15, 20, half an hour commute, or whatever it is. At least I'm now going to be in an environment that's healthy, because they could see that it's actually healthy. So that's your third. So I'm going to go, part of the way of driving that behavior is I'm going to go there because I can collaborate better. I have these wonderful systems in these rooms that give me a much, much better experience in there. It's better for my well-being, or it's actually a more sustainable option for me as well.
Well, that's great. That's three good reasons. And I always assumed that it was more sustainable for people to stay at home because of like you're not driving your car and all those sorts of things. But think about the fact that you're heating an office and you're heating your house, right? And not you, but just in general, that's
Yep.
what's being used. And especially if you're in a big city, the trains are still going to run, the buses are still going to
That's
run.
exactly
You know
right.
how you're going to get there
Doesn't
is
change.
it doesn't change.
Right.
So that's all still being used. The office still needs to be heated and cooled to keep pipes and everything else working.
You can't turn
right?
off an office
You
building.
can't turn it off,
Right.
right? And yeah, I mean, I was in New York City during that worst day.
You were?
Right?
Okay.
I was, and we were, me and our SVP Scott was, like we were walking about, an hour, right, like to get to the next place, and someone called us, and we said, "Oh yeah, we're here." It was one of our end users that's in the city. He said, "Oh, like come to our building. We got fresh air. We got fresh air over here."
Right.
Right, exactly that, because those
Yeah.
buildings are meant to do that. So that's very interesting.
The thing is, it's about anything from a sustainability perspective. You've got to look at both sides of the equation. And what happens is people tend to focus just on one side and not take the other side into account. So to your point, people say is like, okay, well, the commute is the only thing that pollutes. Okay, but that assumes you're using no energy when you stay at home. So it's fair enough. So if it's in the middle of the winter and it's well below freezing, you turn your heating off at home, you got a good point.
Yeah.
But then that's not going to help your well-being in there. So it's like, it's and it doesn't apply necessarily in every single case. But when you look at the example that I gave you, 300 people around one single office, and that's not a very big office. Now you take it up to some of these large offices that you get in Manhattan and other cities.
Yeah.
So here's what's going to happen. So if you think about it, if you're an investor in an airline, what do you care about? What's the really most important metric that you care about?
Well, I want the planes in the air because that's when they're making money.
Right. So you care about passenger miles flown. You don't care about the number of airplanes. You don't care about the number of seats because you have no idea. Who cares how many airplanes you fly? I only care about passenger miles flown because I know that's got a revenue associated to it. So what you're going to see eventually happen is buildings will look at energy consumed per person per period of time that they're actually inside of that building. And now I can motivate you to go to the office as well. Because now I could turn around because now if you think of where the AI will evolve to is now I can turn around and say, that's interesting. I can now figure out that if I encourage another 100 people to come to the office, here is how much more efficient we'll be on the energy that we have to put into the office anyway. So that's that sustainability reason to then drive. But the employee doesn't know. So it's like, unless they know, they're not going to make how are they supposed to know? And I think that's why you have to look at all the things, for example, that we're doing that gives you the data, that drives the AI, and that makes sure when they get the office, they have the experience that they want as well. So it doesn't become, a lot of employees complain and they say, look, when I get to the office, the rooms don't work. It's a horrible environment. So I'm better set up at home than I am in the office. You hear that all the time.
Absolutely.
That's a problem with the company.
Yeah.
And, again, I think a lot of companies know that they'll have a limited runway before suddenly the people will say, well, I'm going to go to other companies that will give me that flexibility. You are not going to undo hybrid work. Hybrid work is here to stay forever. That's never, ever going to change. The question is how do you deploy it as an organization that actually retains your employees and retains your talent in there? That's the key thing.
Sure, absolutely. In fact, it was always going towards a more hybrid environment, even pre-pandemic.
Yes.
It just that it fast forwarded it, and everyone had to learn, what they would have learned in 15 years, they had to learn in 5.
Right. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. Yeah.
We talked a lot about how to bring people back into the office. We talked about some companies having the mandate, others not having a mandate, and we talked about Cisco that it doesn't have the mandate.
Right.
So what are you organically seeing? Who's coming into the office?
Yeah.
How many? Why are they coming? What's your data, and what do your employees say?
Right. So I'll give you some very specifics there to answer that question. So back to going to Pen 1 that we talked about earlier on. Before the pandemic, we had 140 people coming in there pretty much every single day. After the pandemic, now we have 140 people coming in every single day. So you might turn around and say, Chris, well, you spent all that money. It's like it was probably a waste of time. If you drill down one level deeper, before the pandemic, there were 200 unique badge-ins every single month. So it's basically the same 140 people showing up pretty much every day.
Mm-hmm.
after the pandemic, 650 unique badge-ins every single month. So what we've just done is we've just widened the envelope. Same number of people coming in, but now we spread it across 650 people, and that's hybrid work.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a very specific example of how you're going to get a wider reach. Okay, so what has that meant as well? Is it meant we've been able to look at some of the regional offices and say, well, we probably don't need those. And every company is going to probably downsize their real estate. Most companies don't know by how much. So again, they're forcing the mandates because they're saying, yeah, we spent all this money on building this new office. You better well use it.
Yeah.
So we're going to force you to go in there. That's a dangerous. As long as everybody does it, that's fine. But as soon as you get more and more companies that say, oh no, we can't retain our talent, they're going to flip back to the hybrid work. I think the other interesting one is in Atlanta, where that's actually a brand new facility. So Penn 1 was retrofitted.
Mm-hmm.
So we basically created a smart office inside of a building that's, Penn 1's 50 plus years old. I think it was early 70s, late 60s is when it was actually constructed. So you had certain limitations in there that you could work with. But in Atlanta, brand new facility. So there we really were able to get it from the ground up. But again, I just gave you the example of how we've created a wider net to get people to come into the cloud, into Penn 1. In Atlanta, it was really the office was opened earlier in the year, and it was opened with our CEO Chuck, as well as the governor of Georgia, and also the president of Atlanta Tech. And the challenge there is a lot of students who would graduate would then leave the city. So they were saying, how can we keep them in there? So within Georgia Tech now, we're actually within the campus. That building is actually within the campus. So we have floors in there. Georgia Tech has floors in there as well. So the idea there is a lot of the students then get an experience of what it's like to work in that environment, with the goal then that we're going to generate hundreds and hundreds of jobs. So those students, when they graduate, won't then leave the city or even leave the state. So again, it's that thoughtful process right the way through to think of how do we do this? How do we do it right? And there's so many factors. And what happens, a lot of companies, and we discussed a lot of those factors already, but a lot of companies don't know how to connect all those factors together to create an environment and an experience that makes people want to work for that organization and want to stay in that organization.
Now, we talked about EQX, but you have another product as well called Campfire.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that, how that was developed, and how you see that being deployed?
Yeah. So technically, it's not a new product because it's actually a configuration of the existing video devices that we already have. But the key there is the AI. So, for example, when we talked earlier on about cinematic meetings, if you look at it at a high level, you say, well, it's just multi-cameras. That's been around forever. Yeah, it's been around forever. And typically, you'd then have to have a human body in the room that's actually managing those cameras to get the right shots in there. So what does that lead to? It's not scalable. So it's fine for the executive meetings where they say, yeah, I can go and have a person sitting there doing the cameras. But as you then go down through the organization, it's not scalable to everywhere else. So what our AI does is then make that scalable. So now it's making all the decisions, so I don't have to have a human being there. Now, for regular different types of conference rooms, great. But you also have the ones where you have the square table, campfire, where the executives or teams sit all the way around when they're all physically in person. Well, how do you then do that in the hybrid world and make it such so that people, A, that are remote feel that they're included in that meeting, and B, the people that are sitting in that meeting are seeing everybody remote. So now you're getting into a critical element of the right furniture together with the technology to make it as natural as possible. So you've seen, again, if I say a surround camera, you've got plenty of manufacturers there where they say, oh, great, I can put a camera in the middle of the conference room table that takes a 360 image of there so that the people at home can see everybody around the table. That's fine. But it's completely not engaging because the camera is there, and where are the screens typically? Over there.
Yeah, over there.
Or over there.
Yeah.
So what happens is when I'm then going like, okay, now I want to talk to you, and you're remote, and I see you on the screen over there, then it's like, okay, now I've got to turn my head and I'm looking at you the screen, but the camera is looking at me this way because I'm seeing you on the screen. So now the person that I'm talking to is seeing the side of my head, clearly not engaging. So what this does is it basically puts the cameras and the screens in the middle campfire on each side. So, you have to have, like I said, the exact right furniture, and you guys have built some phenomenal stuff around that, so that if you were sitting across the table, you and I can converse, but at the same time, I'm seeing the people remotely here as well. So you got to get the right distances. It's, a lot of laws of physics and stuff in there involved to then make it as natural as possible. And I can see everybody at home on the screens then in front of me that are there as well, without losing that eye contact, which is the key thing. So everybody can see everybody else, read their expressions, and feel that they're actually part of the meeting. And you've got to have that fundamental to sort of say, I want to make sure that everybody feels included. If you're an organization that doesn't care about that, then it's like, yeah, you're not gonna make hybrid work successful. So these campfire environments are, it's going to be, typically you see those in the executive on the boardroom side is typically where you see those.
Yeah, it was an exciting project. We did a nice thing in the middle, and then we used our arc table around the side, which is actually the table that's you're behind us over here.
Right.
So with all this technology in these spaces, how is the IT department supposed to manage all of that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And you can't manage what you can't see. And I think what people don't realize is that in order for you to scale, you have to be able to manage the environment in easy ways. So one of the things that we have is what's called WebEx Control Hub, and that's a single pane of glass where you can actually manage not just all of the video devices, but also if you have WebEx itself, you can manage in there. Also, you could actually, if you have telephones, headsets, anything like that, they're all manageable. The earphones, the noise canceling earphones that we have as well, fully manageable, and an upgrade path through Control Hub. And I think what people don't really realize either is what then becomes the value of the environmentals that you then see as well. So in Control Hub, I can see air quality, temperature, humidity, noise, everything else I can see inside of Control Hub because all of the devices are measuring that. So I can tell and I can correlate as to, why are people using that room and they're not using that room? Is it because of an environmental reason? Has the air handling unit broke? So is it super hot in there? Is it somewhere where there's no airflow, so it gets really stuffy? We all know how many times we've been into stuffy conference rooms in there. Well, if you're measuring it, then you can manage it. Mm-hmm. Now you take that all the way then from a sustainability perspective, we measure the energy on all of our devices. So what now happens is that not only do we measure it, but then we also provide you what the greenhouse gas effects of that is, and we also provide you an opportunity to actually save that. So for example, we have something called office hours. Mm-hmm. So our collaboration devices, you can say office hours are from, let's say, from 9 till 6. Outside of those hours, it'll go into a low power standby mode and it won't be woken up unless you touch it. Whereas normally if you walk into a room, it senses that somebody's walked into the room, so it will wake up automatically out of standby mode. Well, if you have digital signage, so if you're using app-based digital signage, for example, and pushing that onto the displays, well, again, that'll show all the time. Yeah. And the worst contributors there are cleaners that come in and clean at 8 o'clock at night. They go into every single conference room to clean and check the trash and everything else. And what happens is in every single one of those conference rooms, each time your device would wake up. So what we say inside a Control Hub, that saying is like, if you turn on office hours, you could potentially save X amount of greenhouse gases and X amount or Y amount of energy. Now, you then take that into the wider scope, you can integrate our devices with lights and shades. So for example, at Pen 1, we have power over Ethernet, PoE lights, and power over Ethernet shades. I don't need any separate control systems or anything like that. I just address those things directly from the video system, so it can turn on the lights and it can drop the shades. Well, we're a networking company as well, and our PoE switches also measure the actual energy consumed then to the lights and to the shades. So now I can start to build a picture of what at the really, really granular level. And as you know, in the US, the UK, Nordics, and probably other countries as well, if you're a public company, you have to prove to the financial regulators as to how you've calculated your net zero. So if you're part of ESG, it's like, hey, we're going to do net zero by 2040. You have to prove how you actually go and do that. So imagine now that you're getting that data from Control Hub that tells you down to the granular level. So the other thing is most of the time people can measure energy at their electrical panel. Well, but that doesn't help you because you don't know everything else. You then don't know where you could save things. So now take that to the next level. If I have, for example, app space, employee experience, space management, I could now start to say, okay, well, look, I've got 5 floors to my building. I know on a Monday afternoon it's only going to be 20% full or 30% full. Let me then fill up if it's the winter, the top 3 floors first, and leave the bottom 2 empty, so that I can then turn down the heat. Assuming it's winter, I can turn down the heat and save energy there as well. I'm measuring all of that, and I can then react to it. The other thing is that we have, for example, in Pen 1 is when you walk into the room, the people count of our devices will tell the air handling unit how many people have just walked into the room. Okay? We talked earlier on about how important fresh air is. What's the problem with fresh air? It's expensive. Yeah. Why most countries do have legislation, it does vary, but have some form of legislation that says you have to have a minimum amount of fresh air that you have to put into a public building, into an office. That's typically around 20%. So 80% of the air is recirculated. Most people don't know that. That's typically by law in most countries. And why is that? It's like, well, because if I circulate 100% fresh air and it's below freezing outside, I'm going to have to heat all of that air up and then put it into the building. So that's extremely expensive. So the more I can recirculate, the less energy I have to put in. So great from an energy perspective, really bad from a human health perspective, because I'm recirculating stale air. So if you're not measuring that, you don't know how to adjust it. So now imagine if I have people count in the room and there's nobody there, I can say, well, there's nobody in this room, so let me adjust the set point. So I'm going to, again, in the winter, I'm going to raise it a little bit because there's nobody in the room. And I'm going to tell the air handling unit, I don't need to push as much fresh air in here either. In fact, pretty much nothing, because there's nobody there.
Yeah.
The moment that then, let's say a meeting starts and 10 people walk into the room, I'm immediately telling the air handling unit 10 people have walked into the room. So it can react instantaneously. And normally what happens in a normal building is you have to wait for the temperature to go up or what have you, and then to try and catch it, which means I'm often oversizing air handling units and capacity to try and catch it. Now imagine if I have that granular level of control and input from our devices without having to put additional thermostats and additional people count sensors and occupancy sensors. Companies often spend millions of dollars doing that. I don't have to do any of that. I just use the data that's already there, that's served up in Control Hub, and that can then give me a picture, and then I can react on that to then actually save energy. A lot of companies, I always give the example of, if you fly anywhere, you can pay 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 bucks, depending how far you fly, to offset your carbon footprint. So that's good. That makes you feel really good here, but it does nothing for the environment because you're still sitting on a plane that's actually polluting.
Sure.
So the idea here is that you actually drive behavior that physically saves energy, like we talked about earlier on. It's like this notion that the only thing that pollutes is the commute to the office is a fallacy, because the office has to be heated or cooled anyway. So this is that same notion, is what can you do to then actually save the energy, not just offset it, but actually save the energy in there. And that's then what you can do with the management system inside a Control Hub.
Yeah, it's like having a sale and you go and you buy something that you don't need for 50% off, and you think, oh, I saved $100. Like, no, you spent $100.
Right. That's a good answer. Yeah, that's exactly
it. Exactly. So we talked about how the stakeholders and how AV and the tech managers can manage the system and the floors and the environment and all that. How do the workers manage how do I know that this space is available? Because especially in the offices that you're designing,
Yeah.
right, and these offices that are representative of what Cisco believes is the future, right?
Yep.
There really isn't designated spaces, right? So
No.
it's hot desking, and there isn't even enough hot desks necessarily for everybody that may
Right.
come in a particular day.
Yes.
So how is that managed? It's really
Yeah.
interesting.
It's a good question. So yes, there are no dedicated office spaces at all for nobody. For example, in New York, nobody has a dedicated office space. Everything is shared, and then a percentage of that is bookable, and then the vast majority is not bookable in advance. And I think that those ratios will change over time as you learn how many people go in. And it's like, because I don't want to go into the New York City office and then find out I don't have a space to go in, for example. So a
Sure.
lot of companies, if they're in a state where they say, I have so much real estate space still left compared to the number of people coming in, I don't have to think about that yet. But then as you start to reduce the size of your real estate footprint, it's more likely that you're then going to have to manage how people, when people, and have to have systems in place that will allow you to allocate that so a user doesn't turn up and find they have no space. So the first thing that we have currently is we actually use our board pros on your lifts, so that when you walk into the office and at different parts within the office as well, we have our 75-inch board pros on one of the Salamander automatic lifts, and then anybody, no matter how tall or how short they are, can walk up to that and can see an overview of the whole floor space. What's occupied, what's not occupied, what's being booked, what's not booked, and then they can choose where they want to go. And when they click on that, and this is using something called Cisco Spaces. Cisco Spaces takes all of the analytics and basically can present that to you. And it has, I think we have at Pen One, we have 5,000 data points that go into spaces, because when you put everything over PoE, for example, I can manage it and I have data coming from it, which I can then present back to the user. So if I walk into Pen One, the first thing I see is a board pro on a Salamander lift, and then I can go in there. Where is this space where I can go and work? And if I find something, I'll just click on it, and then basically then it says, yeah, okay, and it turns blue, and then I have 3 minutes or 5 minutes to actually walk into that space so that I don't find somebody else jumps into it. Once I go in there, because we have that people count, it knows it's being occupied, so it'll then show to everybody else that it's occupied. So that's at one level. But then if I'm sitting at home and I want to book for next week and I want to have visitors and everything else, then I could overlay something like AppSpace on there, which has an employee experience and space management built into that as well. So if both of us are going to go into the office next week, then I might want to sit right next to you on a hot desk, and then I'll book that so that then it's reserved. But it's a little bit, the example that I always give is it's not like a hotel reservation. So if I make a hotel reservation, I've paid for it. Even if I don't show up, that room actually will be empty if I don't show up, because the hotel's got paid for it, so they don't care.
Yeah.
This you've got to equate to an airline reservation. So airlines is completely the opposite. If I book a seat on a plane and I don't show up within 20 minutes of that plane going, my seat will be occupied by somebody else. Okay,
Yeah.
even though
And you don't get a refund.
and I don't get a refund
Exactly.
because
Yeah.
I didn't show up.
So they sold it twice.
Yes. So this is the same effect where it's like we've booked that hot desk. Let's say I can't get into the office and I've forgotten to unbook it. Anybody else can walk up to it and go, okay, I know it was booked, but it's not my identity. So I can still go up there and then make it my own, and then basically different ways of doing it: scan a QR code, plug in your laptop, depends whether you have WebEx or anything else in there, and then it becomes my own. So then it becomes my phone number. If I have a phone number associated to it, it becomes my identity. All my meetings will show up, so I can just press one button to push. So again, I have the ability to reserve it. If I don't show up, then anybody else can then go and use it as well.
Chris, we're very proud to be part of your office spaces that you're building and refreshing. You're not only in New York, but also Georgia Tech. We're part of that, and all over the country, and actually all over the world as well. What made Cisco choose Salamander?
So I think it's a couple of things. One is that I think with some of our systems like the Panorama, Salamander designed really tables that were very specific to that environment that allowed us to create an experience where the furniture was important as well. I think that's one aspect. The other thing is I think I mentioned earlier on as well is like the modular design in there. So I think one of the things that Salamander does is you have the ability to have that premium look and feel, but have the functionality of understanding it's in a sort of AV video type of environment. So there's lots of things built into there that allow you, for example, your lifts in there, automatic lift stand. So it's like, you can have a 75-inch board pro, but if you can't move it up and down, and if you're 5'2" or 3 or 4, you'll never be able to reach the top. So the inclusivity of them being able to adapt to that. That, for example, we don't have a standard, but you guys have there. I think that's very important. It's the effect of things look like they're attached to the wall when they're actually not. So that gives you great modularity and flexibility inside of that as well. It's how you're connected with our resale partners. So now it becomes easy for our resale partners to put things together because you supply those resale partners that also resell Cisco as well. So it makes it much easier for them to basically drive that experience together out for a customer in there. So you have great relationships with those partners in there. I think the global aspect that you can go anywhere in the world in terms of I know you have a lot of customers that we jointly have that are global in there. So I think all these things are very important. And the other thing is I have to say is that together between, because I've been involved in some of those things as well, between Cisco and Salamander, you've come up with some great innovations that make and enhance our solutions even more. And so it's not cookie cutter as it often is with furniture people, where it's just cookie cutter and you do it whichever way you want to. The thought process that Salamander has really matches the outcomes that we're trying to achieve as well from a Cisco perspective and from all the things that we discussed earlier on.
Yeah, for example, the EQX, where you guys came out with that, and something else was mounted on that credenza, and you sent us the CAD and the information for the EQS and said, how can we adapt this cabinet to this new product?
Yes.
And then our engineering department took your information and we send you an adapter kit, so that way the cabinet didn't need to be totally redesigned or replaced. Or, it's just basically maybe adding a little bit, subtracting some stuff in order for that new technology to be implemented.
And I think what we talked about earlier on, Campfire was another example. Campfire, we have the tech. Like I said, it's not a product on its own. It's the way that you configure products that we already have. But the absolute key critical part of that is the furniture, because that gives you the laws of physics and the angles and everything else as to what you can do, what you can fit. And again, you guys have done the same thing there, where it's like you then took that and said, okay, here's how we can design around that. So I think that flexibility and that innovation that Salamander has to be able to adapt to that environment to make sure that you have the best outcomes for the actual customer.
Yeah, and so much of what we do is exactly what you're doing with Campfire. It's not about necessarily bringing in new products into the factory here and creating something completely new. It's taking things we already have here and configuring it in a new way that supports the AV vision and the aesthetic vision of the designers and the AV specialists that we're working with.
And I think it goes back to something that we touched on earlier on is like, what a lot of companies make a mistake on in hybrid work is, they ask architects to go and design spaces for them, and then they'll put the technology in at the end, as opposed to starting with what's the technology that I want to use in here, and then make sure that you design around that. And that's a lot of what we learned in Pen One and the other places and what have you. It's like when you take that approach, you're going to create an environment that people want to work in and that feels comfortable to them, and that then drives that experience that's very engaging. But again, you have to make sure that you understand all of the components in there. And I think the nice thing is for our resale partners is they can go to a customer and say, yeah, we know how to do this and who to do it with, because obviously we, Cisco, don't sell furniture. Mm-hmm. That's not what we do, but our resale partners do. So they can take the furniture pieces, they can take our technology aspect, and then build a whole environment for our customers. And that's what we've seen, quite frankly, at Pen One. We've created like lookbooks and what have you, because customers come in there and they say, I want to buy this room. We, Cisco, don't sell the whole room. our resale partners in conjunction with Salamander do. So it's like it then makes it an easy one-stop shop for our customers and value for our resale partners then as well.
Yeah, and that whole concept of thinking about the technology at the start of the design of the room is so important, because unlike in years past, when you would say, okay, well, you walk into this boardroom and what am I going to do? Yeah. Well, I'm going to talk to the person on the other side of the table. That's what I'm going to do. Right. And when that's what it was, you could just design it for how comfortable it is and how it looks and everything else, and that sort of thing, right? But now that's not what you're doing in a conference room. It's like, what are you doing? You're sharing content on a display, right? You're connecting with somebody that is remote.
Yep.
Right. And if you don't start the design knowing that that's what you're doing in the room, then how are you going to design the room?
Right.
It's like you're designing a living space where you're mostly going to watch TV, but putting all of the chairs facing away from where the TV is. Yeah. It doesn't make any sense.
And it's like earlier on as part of cinematic meetings, I talked about cross-view, for example. So that you would put, you've got the EQX with cameras at the front of the room, and then you got 2 cameras at the side of the room. Well, imagine if you had one of these conference rooms where 2 side walls were glass walls.
Well, then
it'll be very annoying to the people at the far end, because they're constantly seeing people walk behind the subject. And, again, we watch TV. When somebody's being interviewed and they've got a crowd behind them, what do you naturally do? Is you look at the crowd behind them. That's naturally where you're always focusing, is picking up the people behind them, because your brain is trying to say, okay, well, look, there's so much going on. Let me pick off, you get distracted very quickly by what's actually behind you.
And then if you want to have a private meeting, it's hard to do. But that's also where Cisco can come in, because you can control the shades, or maybe there's glass that can become opaque.
Yep.
Just saying, hey Cisco, because it's voice controlled too, right?
Yes, it is.
It's Hey WebEx, or what's the?
It's you can. It's basically Hey WebEx.
Yeah.
So in Pen 1, for example, there's this one room that actually faces out towards. It looks directly onto the Empire State Building. Mm-hmm. So often the shades will be down in that room, and so you just go in there and say, hey WebEx, open the shades, and then the shades will automatically lift up, and then you get a view of the Empire State Building.
Yeah.
And the thing is, the traditional analog AV integration of doing that, A, was very costly, which means you couldn't do it in a lot of rooms, and B, had so many points of failure, so very difficult to manage. Now that you can do that all with Power over Ethernet and IoT devices in there, you can now scale this across your smaller rooms as well. So that the ability of the AI allows you to scale this across more rooms, so that you can give the experience that was previously thought of only at the executive level, with conference producers and other human beings doing all the fancy work behind the scenes. You can now drive that all the way down.
Sure, and even have like a button, or say hey WebEx, start a private meeting, right? And then it's just a scene that closes the shades, something like that.
Yes.
Or maybe even have sensors, or it on a time schedule, so the shades are always at the right level, because at different times of the year the sun may be at a different level, and you don't want that coming in and maybe backlighting somebody so they can't see them on camera, or washing out the display.
Or energy.
Or energy as well, absolutely. Because it's so important for when the end user wants to have a meeting, that it's very easy to have the exact right lighting and the right setting for the type of meeting that they're going to have. And the harder that is to be made, the more likely that person isn't going to want to use the room, and they're thinking to themselves, why didn't I just do this at home?
Yeah, right.
Right.
And then,
because it's too cumbersome.
Yep.
There's like 10 windows. Where's the blind I need to?
Yep.
Just have it all. It's inexpensive enough now. Have it all, one button press or voice control, and then you're all set.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Chris, thank you for coming. Really appreciate the drive down today. Come down anytime.
Yeah, Chris, I appreciate it. Thanks for your time. Thank you.
Great. And thanks for watching.